Lockerbie is a quaint and historic market town in the southwest of Scotland, with a population of less than 4,000 people. Not much happens there, and before this disaster, most people had never heard of this sleepy town. However, the events of Wednesday, December the 21st, 1988, would thrust the name Lockerbie into newspapers around the world, and forever link it to one of the worst terrorist attacks in recent history, when a bomb aboard a Pan Am Boeing 747 bound for New York detonated, leading to the aircraft disintegrating and parts of the fuselage crashing into the town. 270 people died, including 11 on the ground, and to this day, it remains the deadliest terrorist attack in the United Kingdom. Welcome to Tales of Tragedy. This disaster requires a bit of context, and so, rather than travelling back to the year of the tragedy, 1988, we need to go back a little further to 1986. It's important to state off the bat that not everything is known about why this atrocity occurred and who was truly responsible. However, all roads appear to lead to Libya, a country in northern Africa. Whilst relations between Libya and the United States are now described as cordial and cooperative, in the 1980s things were very different when the country was under the rule of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. He was a man who had seized control in 1969 and who had aligned himself with the Soviet Union. By the early 1980s, there were significant tensions between Libya and the United States, and this rapidly escalated in the spring of 1986 when US planes began flying over the Gulf of Sidra, which lies off the north of the country. In response, Libyan forces tried to shoot down the aircrafts, and this led to a bombing campaign against their positions. Around 2 weeks after the US response, on the 5th of April 1986, a bomb concealed in a bag was detonated in a Bell nightclub in West Germany. The explosion killed one Turkish woman and 2 US service personnel, as well as injuring 229 others. This was a nightclub which was popular with members of the US Armed Forces stationed in the area, and it was believed that they were the main target. US President Ronald Reagan blamed Libya and authorised a bombing campaign against the capital Tripoli and Benghazi, the country's second most populated city, and this resulted in the deaths of at least 45 people, mainly civilians. In response, a plan was formulated to get revenge on America by blowing up a US commercial airliner. No doubt this was an operation authorised by Gaddafi himself and undertaken by members of the country's security service. The planning included obtaining the bomb components from various countries, and by December 1988, everything was ready. 2 members of Libyan intelligence, Abu Agil Masoud and Abdel Bassat al-Magrahi, flew in on false passports from Libya to Malta. It's naive to believe that these were the only 2 Libyan nationals involved, but they're the only ones that can be linked to this act of terror definitively. Malta is a country between Sicily and the North African coast. The Prime Minister at the time was also not a fan of the United States and allowed a Libyan radio station called the Voice of Friendship and Solidarity to broadcast anti-Western propaganda from the island. It's also believed that Malta had been the staging area for several atrocities directed by Gaddafi. On December the 20th, 1988, the bomb was constructed, apparently by Masoud, and hidden in a portable stereo. It consisted of a timer and Semtex, which, although more recently, is produced with an odour so that it can be detected. In the 1980s, this plastic explosive was produced without any detectable scent, making it almost impossible to detect by sniffer dogs. This was then placed in a Samsonite suitcase and packed with clothing. Al-Magrahi was integral to getting the suitcase to its final destination, and he tagged it for onward transfer to New York aboard Pan Am Flight 103, leaving London Heathrow Airport at 6:25 p.m. the following evening, before dropping off at Malta's Lucca Airport, where, after first arriving at Frankfurt Airport, it was transported to Heathrow, arriving there in the late afternoon, December the 21st. The timer had been set for the bomb to detonate at around 7 p.m, 35 minutes after takeoff. At 6 p.m. on Wednesday, December the 21st, 1988, the pilots of Pan Am Flight 103, the Boeing 747, were sat at their departure gate at Heathrow Terminal 3, completing their final checks. The aircraft was named Clipper Made of the Seas, which it proudly displayed on the side of its fuselage. On board with 243 passengers and 16 crew members. They came from 21 different nations, however the majority, 200 of them, were American citizens. This was followed by 32 from the United Kingdom. Most of them were flying home to spend Christmas with their families. The passengers were settling into the cabin, unaware that a suitcase containing a bomb was located in the left-hand side of the luggage compartment at the front of the plane beneath their feet, which was set to go off in 60 minutes. The oldest passenger was 82, the youngest just 2 months old. At 6:04 p.m, Pan Am Flight 103 pushed back from the gate and taxied to runway 27 right before taking off at 6:25 p.m. The plane was intended to fly north over Scotland before turning and continuing its journey over the Atlantic towards its final destination, New York's JFK Airport. At 7 p.m, Pan Am Flight 103 was at a cruising altitude of 31,000 feet, travelling at 499 miles per hour, and was over the small town of Lockerbie. The bomb then detonated. The explosion itself and the resulting shockwave was so powerful that the nose of the aircraft was torn clean off. Within 3 seconds, the cockpit, fuselage, and number 3 engine were falling separately out of the sky. The passengers and crew were taken completely by surprise, so no distress call was made and the oxygen masks were not deployed. The rapid decompression of the aircraft meant that everyone on board was rendered unconscious within seconds. The tornado-force wind sucked objects out of the plane, and as they hurtled through the air, they became lethal projectiles. Forensic examiners estimated that around 147 passengers and some of the flight attendants survived the initial blast and the decompression of the aircraft. Out of these, likely over half regained consciousness as the stricken aircraft reached breathable air as it plummeted vertically from the sky. In those last few minutes, they must have been terrified. At a later inquest, which reported that a mother was found holding her baby, 2 friends were holding hands, and a number of passengers were found clutching crucifixes. As the fuselage plummeted, pieces of it fell away and began raining down on Lockerbie. On the ground, the residents of the town heard an explosion and saw a fireball in the sky. Some people initially thought it was a meteor, until they saw the sky beginning to rain fire, which was heading right down towards them. Local resident Ronald Stevenson gave a vivid description of what he saw. He was at the local train station, waiting to meet his daughter. He was listening to the radio in his car, then heard a noise, quote, "My first thought was that the train was over-revving its engines. It got progressively louder and became thunderous. I got out of the car. I saw an object coming from the north. It was a black mass showing some form of lights, a small flame, enough for me to see the dark shape and the passage of the object. It was coming down on what I would call a glide path at a shallow angle." He then described seeing an entire wing plummeting from the sky. He continued, "The whole of the wing was descending vertically straight down. I could see it wingtip to wingtip, a clean wing, silhouetted against the clouds from the town lights. A rolling ball of fire was descending rapidly from the sky. In the ball of flame, I could see objects descending, black objects hurtling down towards the Sherwood Crescent end of the town. After the wing had crashed down, I saw a door panel which came shimmering down in the night sky, silver, very clearly visible." Other residents witnessed the same thing, and to their horror, realised they were watching parts of a plane hurtling towards their town. They screamed to others to get down and take cover. The wings, still attached to a piece of fuselage, hit 13 Sherwood Crescent at more than 500 miles an hour and exploded, creating a crater 47 metres wide. The residents of the property, 63-year-old Maurice Henry and his 56-year-old wife Dora, were killed instantly and their bodies vaporised, meaning that no remains were ever recovered. Also vaporised were several of the neighbouring houses, and 21 others were so badly damaged that they later had to be demolished. An entire family was wiped out when 15 Sherwood Crescent was destroyed, and the dead included John and Rosalind Somerville, both aged 40, and their children, 13-year-old Paul and Lindsay, who was just 10. Number 16, 44-year-old Thomas Flanagan, his wife 44-year-old Kathleen, and their daughter 10-year-old Joanna also lost their lives. Heartbreakingly, their 14-year-old son Stephen was out of the house at the time, and when he returned, he found his home destroyed and his parents and sister dead. He became known as the Orphan of Lockerbie. He never recovered from the tragedy and died at the age of 26 in the year 2000 of a suspected suicide when he was hit by a train near his home in Hayward in Wiltshire. Also amongst the dead were 81-year-old Mary Lancaster, who lived in number 11, and 82-year-old Jean Murray, who lived in number 14 Sherwood Crescent. This brought the number of dead in the town of Lockerbie to 11, all clustered along one set of houses on a single street. Heartbreakingly, 2 people, including one passenger and one member of the cabin crew, who was situated in the nose of the plane, appeared to have miraculously survived the impact with the ground, but both died of exposure. It's believed that at least one of them might have survived if they'd been found immediately after the crash. However, all 259 passengers and crew eventually perished. Adding to this were the 11 people killed on the ground, meaning the final death toll of this horrific act of terrorism was 270 men, women and children. The true scale of the devastation only became apparent the next morning. As well as the utter destruction, the residents of Lockerbie had to deal with the horrific sight of bodies and body parts scattered everywhere. These lay in the positions they were found for a number of days, whilst forensic workers photographed and tagged the location of each body to help determine the exact position and force of the onboard explosion. A resident called Bunty Galloway later recalled, quote, "A boy was lying at the bottom of the steps onto the road, a young laddie with brown socks and blue trousers on. Later that evening, my son-in-law asked for a blanket to cover him. I didn't know he was dead. I gave him a lamb's wool travelling rug, thinking I'd keep him warm. 2 more girls were lying dead across the road, one of them bent over garden railings. It was just as though they were asleep. Every time I came back to my house for clothes, he was still there. My boy's still there, I used to tell the waiting policeman. Eventually on Saturday, I couldn't take it no more. You've got to get my boy lifted, I told the policeman. That night, he was moved." This disaster shows the very worst, but also the very best of humanity, with the people of Lockerbie doing whatever they could to help the bereaved, as well as the soldiers and police who had the horrific task of combing through the wreckage and recovering the bodies of men, women and children. Volunteers in Lockerbie set up and manned canteens 24 hours a day, providing free sandwiches, hot meals, coffee, and someone to talk to. Despite being told not to travel to Lockerbie, many of the relatives of those who died made their way to the town, and they too were taken care of by the residents, including being given places to stay. The townspeople collated all of the clothing they could find, washed, dried and ironed every piece, so that as much could be returned to the relatives as possible. They also sent heartbreaking notes to the families of the dead, trying to express how much they cared about their lost loved ones. One letter entitled R. Frank read, quote, "When your dear one came to us from the night, it was so unbelievable, haunting, and desperately sad. You said that your visit altered the picture for you in many ways. This is just how it was for us too. He was never just another victim to us. For months we called him our boy. Then we found out his name. He was R. Frank. Please believe me, we were deeply affected by his coming to us." The people of Lockerbie were rightly hailed as being heroes in the press. This whole thing angers me so much, and on so many levels, and this is how I feel regarding any terrorist attack, whether this be 9/11, 7/7, the 2004 Madrid train bombings, or the 2015 Paris attacks, to name just a few. You have these pathetic excuses for human beings who target men, women and children who have nothing to do with whatever grievance they have, and believe that by killing them, they have struck a blow for their cause, and are righteous in their slaughter of the innocent. They are innocent. Anyone who believes that just because you live in a nation or have a certain colour passport, you are directly accountable for the decisions of the government, and therefore fair game, is deranged. Anyone who disagrees, please explain to me how the 8 children who died on 9/11, or the numerous children who died in this disaster, the youngest being just 2 months old, were in any way responsible for bombs being dropped half a world away. However, when these atrocities occur, do you know what happens? People pull together, they look after each other, their determination and strength as a nation is bolstered. Of course I felt fear after 7/7, which resonated with me because I'm from London and go there often, but at the same time I think, fuck you. You won't bring this nation, or any of the other great nations around the world, like America, Spain, France, Germany, wherever, to their knees. These pricks really don't know us at all. Immediately, forensic technicians collated every scrap of evidence and reconstructed the plane to get an idea of how the disaster unfolded. A joint investigation was launched by Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary and the FBI to identify the perpetrators, although they were also supported by various intelligence agencies around the world. Fragments of the Samsonite suitcase which contained the bomb were recovered, along with circuit board fragments which were identical to ones found on a Libyan intelligence officer who had been arrested 10 months before. The timer itself was traced to a manufacturer who supplied the Libyan army. A crucial piece of evidence was charred children's clothing found in the case, which was traced to one specific store in Malta. Intelligence agencies had discovered the name Abdel Basset al-Megrahi and had his picture, and when this was shown to the manager, he identified him as the man who he'd sold the clothes to. An arrest warrant was issued for al-Megrahi in 1991, but it wasn't until 1999 that Gaddafi agreed to hand him over. Part of the condition for this was that he would be tried in a neutral country, and so he stood trial in the Netherlands, and in 2001 he was found guilty of 270 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He served just 8 years before being released in August 2009 on compassionate grounds by the Scottish Government due to suffering from inoperable prostate cancer. He apparently only had weeks to live, but this was clearly a lie, as he didn't die until May 2012, almost 3 years later. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, but I'm not sure that a person involved in the murder of 270 people deserved any sort of compassion. Also, when al-Megrahi arrived back in Libya, he received a hero's welcome, showing that there really are some disturbed and sick people in the world who venerate a murderer of women and children. He always protests his innocence, but it's clear he was involved, so I have no sympathy for him. In 2022, Libya handed Abu Agil Masood over to US authorities, and he was charged with 2 counts of destruction of an aircraft, resulting in death, and 1 count of destruction of a vehicle, resulting in death. He pleaded not guilty, and his trial is set for May 2025. If found guilty, he will inevitably spend the rest of his life in prison. So you have 1 person convicted, and another likely to be in the near future. However, it's clear this was an operation that involved tens, if not hundreds of people at the highest levels of power in Libya who will never face justice. There are several memorials to those who died in the Lockerbie bombing across the world, including at Arlington National Cemetery and Syracuse University, who lost 35 of their students on the flight. In Lockerbie, there are memorials in Sherwood Crescent, where the ground fatalities occurred, and at Tundergarth Church, close to the site where the nose came to rest. There's also a memorial window in Lockerbie Town Hall. Lastly, there's a beautiful garden in remembrance of those who died around a mile outside the town. This is all to ensure that the 200 men, women and children who lost their lives will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for supporting this new channel. You guys are awesome. If you have time, please check out my true crime channel, Evil Among Us. There's a link in the description. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.